Chapter 641 The Weird Job of the Old Assassin. The agility of the weaver ants was not very high to begin with, and now that they had gotten bigger their stiff legs had become something of a burden when it came to running. By the time the mutant insects realized that they had been caught once the sky glowed, a high-pitched shriek rang out from the rear of the army and they all shrieked in response before charging forward with murderous intent flashing in their eyes. Xietain's expression changed slightly upon hearing the high-pitched shriek, but he soon calmed down. He could remember that the other mutant beasts and even second-order zombie general had the ability to command creatures of their kind to some extent, so it didn't necessarily mean that there was a third-order ant. Fire. His words were like the catalyst for the apocalypse, the switch for the end of the world. The armed soldiers who were trembling with fear howled in an attempt to shake off that terrifying fear and pulled hard on the trigger of the guns in their hands. Showers of golden bullets immediately began to fall on the army of mutant ants, and they literally began to fall, like ants, into pools of blood. Although the ants were strong, if they could not get close, they were not dangerous at all, and considering that their bodies were weak, the power of several bullets was more than enough to end their lives, or at least prevent them from continuing to advance. Some of them died on the spot. Others fell after losing several limbs after receiving dozens of shots in their limbs, etc. Don't let the ants' blood touch you. Sun Ling called out as she backed away after seeing her leather armor sizzle slightly after getting hit by a couple of drops of ant blood. Fire wall. Feng Hong shouted from the left flank as he waved a wand towards the front. Swoosh. 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 The mana inside the body of Feng Hong blasted outward and the magical power immediately turned it into fire-like energy. Huge walls of blazing fire over 5 meters high rose up in front of each other, spreading across the entire left flank with ease. Die! Feng Hong roared again, and after waving his hand the fire walls began to slowly advance, consuming everything in their path. The weaver ants did not seem to know the meaning of the word fear at all and ferociously continued to advance, with the single goal of reaching the humans before them. However, when their unprotected bodies came into contact with the several fire walls, their bodies immediately tensed and shrieks of pain escaped from their mouths after igniting into fireballs. But worst of all, even after their bodies were set on fire, they did not die but began to writhe and slam into the ants behind them, causing the fire to spread among the troops of mutant ants just like a forest fire. However, as the ants began to die one after another following being consumed by the flames, a cloud of green smoke began to rise from their corpses and slowly began to float into the surroundings, approaching the human troops. Big brother, the blood. Meng Qi called out as she realized what was happening while cutting off the head of an ant using a sword with over 500 physical attack points that Xietain had given her from among the ones he obtained after attacking Oblong World. Next to her, Little Snow was finishing off the weaver ants in a clever way, using her higher agility to get out and in among the troops after killing several without allowing herself to be caught. But Xietain didn't need his sister's warning as he too had noticed that the acid in the ants' blood had become toxic after being exposed to extremely high temperatures, changing its phase to gaseous. All those with wind-type skills cast them in an easterly direction. Xietan's command was soon heard by all, being reinforced by the different leaders. Immediately after that, wind blades, air cannons, cutting air blasts, and all sorts of skills with the wind element as their core were activated and launched by many soul evolvers. The imminent danger approaching in the form of a toxic cloud was soon driven away, relieving everyone. However, the real danger was far from being close to being solved. Fire snake. Feng Tianwu did not hold back at all when a huge snake over 100 meters long and at least 10 meters wide materialized in front of her. Go! The huge fire snake broke out with truly amazing agility and in an instant appeared at the front of the army of weaver ants located on the left flank. The fire creature fiercely swung its tail and sent hundreds of weaver ants flying with a single movement, and as if that were not enough, the bodies of all the weaver ants that were hit by the summoned snake also burned in blazing flames of fire, and even before they touched the ground they turned into mortal remains. The fire snake was really powerful, and the weaver ants, which were nothing more than unclassified mutant insects, could not take a single hit. In a matter of a couple of minutes, the number of mutant ants killed by the fire snake rose to several thousand, and this number continued to rise at a rapid rate. Swoosh! Suddenly, a copper-colored silhouette charged forward, and with at least 10 times the speed of the other weaver ants appeared in front of the fire snake. The summoned fire creature did not have time to react when a 2-meter-tall ant appeared just below and used its legs that seemed to glisten with a metallic glow under the glare of the flames to cling to the snake's body. Surprisingly, this ant did not suffer too much under the flames of the fire snake. Using monstrous strength, the ant used its powerful jaw and terrifying legs to tear apart the body of the fire snake in a matter of seconds, turning the summoned beast into nothing but sparks of fire that soon disappeared into thin air. The weaver ant, that was actually a level 40 mutant beast, turned around and without delay rushed straight towards Feng Tianwu, who was single-handedly slaughtering dozens and even hundreds of weaver ants with every magic skill she cast in the midst of the horde. Among evolved existences, the distance of several tens of meters was something that could be closed in an instant, and long before Feng Tianwu could turn around to try to defend or counterattack, the first-order weaver ant rose above her and unhesitatingly extended its front legs forward at lightning speed. The strength of an unclassified weaver ant was such that even an unclassified one could hurt Feng Tianwu if she was not careful, as she was a mage with poor defense. Her body would be torn apart on the spot if she were to be hit by the terrifying legs of a first-order one. However, the first-order weaver ant's movement stalled as several chains of crimson fire surrounded its legs. Even so, the ant's strength was so powerful that even as its body began to slowly burn, the power of its legs easily cracked the chains of fire, and it seemed that it would be able to break free within a second. 1 second is enough. Feng Tianwu's voice was neutral. There was no pride or disdain as she chanted under her breath, "Blazing tornado." Bang! A magic circle over 20 meters in diameter appeared under Feng Tianwu's feet as the center, and in an instant, both she and the first-order weaver ant were engulfed by a huge flaming tornado that soared over 200 meters high into the sky. The temperature was so high that the nearby soul evolvers had no choice but to move back, and the distant trees slowly began to burn even under the protection of the world's natural mana. The fire tornado continued to spin in the same place as its core and burned for more than 10 seconds, in the process incinerating all the weaver ants that shrieked and jumped into the flames nonsensically. Slowly, the fire tornado began to lose its spinning speed, and the power of its flames became more and more diminished. A few seconds later, Feng Tianwu was revealed once again. She was standing without any visible wounds except that she was panting very slightly. Behind her, a glowing emerald-green first-order soul stone fell to the ground, making a dull thud. As for the first-order weaver ant, there was no trace of it. Feng Tianwu paused for a moment to observe the other battlefields and realized that everything seemed to be going very well if one took into account that so far no weaver ant had managed to get closer than 50 meters from the human group. The firepower of the soldiers could not be underestimated. Their firearms were even more effective than most melee soul evolvers, as the constant and fast bursts of gunfire created a large curtain, taking down the poorly defense enemies with ease. On the right flank, Liang Jing was the person who was taking the MVP position by far. Even Nangong Lingxin had no choice but to admit defeat as she looked at the old assassin with a weird expression on her face. Liang Jing had just used his dagger to perform several lightning-fast slashes and end the lives of more than 20 weaver ants when his steps hesitated and his body leaned forward, so he had to use his left hand to keep his face from hitting the ground. Swoosh! Just at that moment, the head of a first-order weaver ant passed right where Liang Jing's body was a moment ago, and had it not been for the man almost falling, his body would have been cut in 2 halves by the creature's power. Liang Jing seemed oblivious of the existence of the first-order weaver ant right above him, and by pure Coincidence, he slashed upward with his right hand as if to gain momentum to get to his feet. The black dagger was thrust into the junction between the neck and head of the First Order Weaver ant, and in an instant, a kind of black smoke came out of the creature's body. Liang Jing still didn't seem to have realized what was happening because immediately after he was able to squat down he withdrew his dagger and began to cough as he staggered forward. Bang! An instant later, the First Order Weaver ant fell lifeless on the ground. If Liang Jing hadn't gotten out of there just in time, he would have been trapped under the beast's body. Cough. 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 I'm already too old for these long walks. Old people like me should be enjoying their retirement. Cough. 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 Liang Jing coughed furiously and his face turned red as he staggered and slashed with his dagger seemingly at nothing. He looked as if he was about to die. However, every time his steps wavered, he oddly managed to dodge an attack, and every time he waved his right hand, dark-colored energy in the shape of a half-moon shot out from his dagger and ended the lives of the nearby Weaver ants. The corner of Nangong Lingxin's mouth twitched a couple of times. She couldn't help but think that Liang Jing was really an interesting person, just like that weird job he had. With Nangong Lingxin acting as defense and with Liang Jing slicing all the enemies to pieces, the other soul evolvers on the right flank, who were mainly mages, were able to activate skills with ease and slaughter the Weaver ants with such ease that they couldn't help but feel that this was probably the best war they had had to date. Chapter 642 Tough Battle. At the back of the human group, the Weaver ants were also doing their business, using the ground as their domain and taking over the trees, falling from the sky like rain. It could be said that the group of just over 650 was completely surrounded and there was no place to retreat. The only way they could get out of there was to open up a path of blood by slaughtering the Weaver ants, but it didn't seem to be possible in the short term. Huang Tian carried a shield as big as he was at the front and together with approximately 120 soul evolvers took it upon himself to keep the Weaver ants at bay. The performance of the Black Tortoise Guild members was excellent, to say the least. On the other hand, in addition to a team of 50 soldiers armed with light machine guns and assault rifles that fired intermittent bursts giving their comrades time to change magazines, there was only one soul evolver present to slaughter all the Weaver ants. However, even though there were only 51 attackers, the mountains of corpses belonging to the Weaver ants began to grow slowly and the number of slaughtered insects had risen to more than 200,000 in less than 15 minutes. The blue bow in the hands of Chen He had turned into the scythe of the Reaper and the mana arrows kept flying in all directions. The power behind each arrow was not affected at all even after turning the body of a mutant Weaver ant into a bloody mess and continued to advance hundreds of meters, piercing at least several hundred and even thousands when the ants piled up too much. Explosive arrow. Swoosh. A blazing red arrow shot skyward before losing its strength and plummeting straight into the center of the army of Weaver ants. A second after the arrow stuck into the shell of one of the ants, it exploded like a bomb and everything within 50 meters was completely wiped out. Ha 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 ha. Huang Tian laughed out loud and looked really happy as he shouted at the top of his voice. Fighting like this really is satisfying. To think that even after fighting for all this time against an army of terrifying ants, we didn't even lose a single man. The battle was going so smoothly that the leader of the Blue Dragon Guild had yet to step forward and was only killing the odd First Order mutant ant to dull the boredom. In the center of the troops, Shangguan Bing Shui and Wu Yijuan had been reduced to nothing more than supporting roles at this point. While Wu Yijuan used her skill to boost and communicate with the plants to restrict the movements of any Weaver ants that managed to advance too close to the human troops, Shangguan Bing Shui was the firefighter who put down the fire set by Feng Hong, Feng Tianwu, and other soul evolvers with fire skills. On the left flank, Feng Hong looked to the front and couldn't help but be stunned for several seconds before bursting out laughing. Team leader by, now I understand the reason why Mayor Wu is willing to hand over all his leadership power so easily. The words of Feng Hong caught the attention of several people, so some of them couldn't help that split second of breath to look sideways to the front area only to gasp in amazement at the astonishing sight that awaited them. There, Xietain rested with both hands behind his back, and his posture was as firm as the confidence flashing in his black eyes. In front of him, hundreds of thousands of weaver ants stopped after stepping inside the 200-meter range, and no matter how furiously they shrieked, they failed to even take a step forward. In front of him, Meng Qi and Little Snow casually wandered amidst the terrifying mutant ants that were staring at them with murderous intent brimming but could do nothing about it. A young human beauty and a giant white dog were very selective in killing a weaver ant instead of simply ending the lives of all of them, despite the fact that their heads were served on silver platters. Each and every one of the weaver ants that died under the edge of Meng Qi's sword or under Little Snow's fierce claws were all mutant ants of level 20 or above. The leveling speed of the human woman and the giant dog was slower than it could have been if they just killed at will, but they were clearly focusing on improving the quality of their soul power. Even then, Little Snow soon rose to level 25, and it didn't take long for her to start looking for different targets, as if her instinct was guiding her to accomplish a certain goal. While Xietain wanted to know what class or job Little Snow had chosen, he had no way of knowing. The only thing he knew was that mutant beasts always chose what was best for them based on natural instinct, so at least he wasn't too worried. All soul evolvers below level 15, come to the front and start hunting. Xietain bellowed without looking back. His voice was absolute, just like his existence on the battlefield. The soul evolvers who saw the opportunity to become stronger in front of them did not hesitate to raise their weapons and immediately began to decapitate the weaver ants with ease, and their levels soon began to rise. For every weaver ant that died within the 200-meter range in front of Xietain, another new one would replace it, only to immediately freeze after taking several steps forward. This? Little brother Xietain? Xietain looked back over his right shoulder and calmly asked, "Ant Sun, is something wrong?" Usually, Xietain and Sun Ling called each other by their respective positions as a sign of respect for each other in front of the troops. However, since she was referring to him so closely, then Xietain did not need to feign unnecessary distance. What kind of skill is this?" Sun Ling whispered with wide eyes as she watched the biggest massacre of her entire life being carried out with such ease that even she couldn't help but shudder in fear and feel pity for the mutant ants. Xietain looked straight ahead and said without being too specific, "It's a skill that allows me to control the movements of my enemies to a certain extent." Control the movement of enemies. Sun Ling muttered with wide eyes before gasping in shock. She couldn't help but stare at the young man's back less than 2 meters ahead of her, as if she was looking at a scary and terrifying monster. For the first time, Sun Ling felt relieved that the Chinese Renaissance faction had decided to go the easy path, instead of making things difficult, and at the same time she finally understood the reason why her ever-filial daughter begged her father to surrender with tears in her eyes. Regardless of Wu Yijuan's feelings, Xietan's ability was truly dreadful. Even if Xietan's skill had limits, being able to freeze more than 5 first-order existences along with tens of thousands of unclassified existences, among which there was no lack of existences above level 20, was simply terrifying. The natural enemy of any army. Actually, Xietain had brought his blood manipulation skill to the maximum level of the second order a couple of days ago, and when it reached level 5 he finally gained the ability to stall enemies that stepped within a certain range near him. Although this ability was limited as it depended on the level difference and magic disparity between Xietain and his enemies, the mana consumption was practically ignorable. In fact, Xietain had evolved one more skill besides blood manipulation. However, he would not use the maximum of that skill unless he really had no other choice, since its previous version was already frightening enough, so if possible Xietain would prefer not to know how frightening its evolved version was. Several seconds later, Sun Ling finally managed to snap out of the shock she was feeling. She smiled charmingly and said in a seductive voice, "Little brother Xietain, this big sister really loves you to death. Xietain raised an eyebrow and was about to say that he was not too appreciative of people who spoke of love so easily when a silhouette flashed beyond him. A body as seductive as the whisper of an enchanting demon was reflected in his dark pupils, and the next thing he saw was a shower of blood splattering everywhere. The body of Sun Ling, wrapped in tight leather armor that tightly hugged her curves, blinked between the several weaver ants that stood motionless, not going too far in and only remaining in the 200-meter domain in front of Xietain. His slaughtering speed was countless times faster than that of Meng Qi, Little Snow, or any other soul evolver defending the front of the group. Just as Xietain was amazed by her agility, he noticed something and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise, "Ah! What's that?" From Sun Ling's body, a light cloud of golden color that shimmered like stardust began to spread around, and when the weaver ants inhaled that golden smoke, the struggling in their eyes wavered to the point where even if Xietain stopped freezing their movements, they probably wouldn't move. "Oh?" A slight exclamation of surprise sounded beside Xietain even though there was no one there. He didn't need to see the person to know who it was, for while it was true that Lilith was not visible to the naked eye, Xietain could still feel her natural essence filling his senses. "What a surprise," Lilith said as she watched Sun Ling's movements in admiration. "That woman surnamed Sun actually seems to have an assassin-type class, but at the same time charm-type. Can you see? Her every move seems to be designed to seduce men," emphasizing the curves of her body as if she's doing it on purpose. "That golden smoke is probably some sort of aphrodisiac meant to confuse the senses, and it seems to work on the mutant beasts as well." Xietain nodded and looked at Wu Yijuan's mother in surprise. He didn't expect her to be so strong or have such a good class, as she even managed to catch Lilith's attention a bit. Sun Ling looked like she was really enjoying the moment as she occasionally let out charming giggles as she hacked to pieces all the weaver ants that crossed her path. With the help of Xietain and making use of her fluid movements, as well as her high agility, the soul power within her began to grow rapidly. Time passed quickly, and in an instant, more than 100 minutes had flown by since the battle against the weaver ants began. The mountains of corpses several times had to be cleaned by Feng Hong or Feng Tianwu, as they were both the two most powerful soul evolvers with fire-type skills among those present. The number of weaver ants that had been killed definitely exceeded 5 million at this point, but even then, there was still no end in sight. Like an endless sea with no shore to dock at, the flares and blazes that illuminated everything more than 1,500 meters around the human group revealed the seemingly infinite number of heads charging their way with resolve to fight to the bitter end. Finally, what Xietain and everyone else knew would happen but hoped would not, happened. I'm out of ammunition," shouted the first soldier with trembling hands and pain in his shoulder after enduring the recoil of his gun for nearly 2 hours without rest. As if the first shout triggered something, the other soldiers also began to exclaim about the lack of ammunition. The armed soldiers were the ones keeping the weaver ants at bay for the most part, except for a few mages, as the soul evolvers focused on close combat had to be wary of the corrosive blood. Therefore, once the terrifying storm of bullets abruptly stopped, the weaver ants began to advance with new resolve and with ever stronger murderous intent in search of revenge. The pressure on the team increased immediately now that the weaver ants stopped falling at alarming speeds, so it was inevitable that in the midst of some distraction or lack of ability to react to so many attacks, casualties would appear. It was only a matter of time. Indeed, it was only a matter of seconds before a soul evolver carrying a bone shield was sent flying spitting blood after being rammed by 2 weaver ants attacking together. The soul evolver fell to the ground after flying more than a dozen meters and did not get up again. Life or death was unknown. The weaver ants were mostly weak, and except for their terrifying strength, they were not much of anything, as they were not only relatively slow but their defenses were pitifully weak. However, the terror of this type of creature did not consist of their individual strength. The real terror of this type of creature was that they attacked in massive numbers. Chapter 643 Emperor of the Heavens Ice Goddess. After 2 hours of war where they were not even allowed to take a second of real rest, not only had the gun-toting soldiers officially used up every last round of ammunition in its entirety, but the soul evolvers were also beginning to experience the consequences of fighting so many enemies for so long, without stopping. The mages began to notice how their mana reserves were dropping critically after casting skill after skill, and the melee fighters who had been constantly striving to hold off enemies that outnumbered them by incomparable difference, as well as avoid any drop of blood flying in their directions, began to get exhausted not only physically but also mentally. The first soul evolver that was sent flying by the Weaver ants was only the beginning of the chaos. Not long after the first one, a second one was bitten, which cost him part of his thigh and barely saved him from losing his right leg, and not much later a third one lost her fighting capacity when in a frontal collision against a Weaver ant the bones of one of her arms were broken. The drop in stamina not only meant exhaustion and decreased movement or attack speed, the drop in stamina also meant less focus, slower reaction speed, and of course, weaker muscles. Team leader, we need support on the left flank. Feng Hong reported with a face covered in sweat after finishing off his 10th First Order enemy among countless unclassified. Feng Tianwu said nothing and gritted her teeth. Her gorgeous face was pale as if she was suffering from a severe illness, and her rich lips looked slightly purple after the loss of practically all of her mana. However, she continued to persist and fight without complaint. Team leader, the right flank is about to fall. Liang Jing also reported not long after Feng Hong. His voice sounded raspy and dry, he was panting, and even from a distance his difficulties were noticeable. Hey, Bai Zemin. Huang Tian was injured, and it's just me and Ting Hua to hold off all these ants. Chen He shouted from the back amid explosions and swooshing sounds. If you don't send Bing Shui or Yijuan here soon, then don't blame me if 1 or 2 ants make it through. Even if he was strong and possessed the ability to take on thousands of enemies on his own, Chen He did not have the confidence to hold off hundreds of thousands and even millions for long periods of time. He was already trying hard enough not to allow the ants on the ground and those falling from the treetops to reach the group. In fact, had it not been for Ting Hua and his mutant snake's ability to paralyze enemies by releasing a toxin-filled mist, Chen He could not have avoided the full charge of the mutant ants. At the front, Bai Zemin closed his eyes and was trying to figure out who was the leader of the seemingly endless horde of Weaver ants. However, there was no way that among so many enemies he could find a specific one, not to mention the distance. What do we do? Shangguan Bing Shui appeared beside him in a flash, bringing with her a fresh breeze and a rich scent of jasmine and purity. You want me to take charge? She seemed quite relaxed, which was understandable. If it were in the past, Shangguan Bing Shui might be slightly worried not about her survival as she was confident of escaping from here, but about the possible annihilation of the team. However, after evolving to second order and obtaining a massive increase in stats, as well as the capacity to learn new skills, Shangguan Bing Shui finally realized partially the reason why Bai Zemin was always calm. Bai Zemin sighed in his heart. He really hoped that all of these people would rise to level 25 today, which would be great. In fact, considering the seemingly infinite number of Weaver ants, the possibility was latent. Unfortunately, it was too much to ask for little more than 650 to defend against an endless army for so long. Forget it, at least they all went up 2 or 3 levels. He consoled. Bing Shui, you take the right flank and the rear. Leave the left flank and the front to me, Bai Zemin said calmly. All right. Shangguan Bing Shui nodded and her sexy body swayed slightly, disappearing in an instant and marching to carry out Bai Zemin's command. Big brother, will we really be fine? Asked Meng Qi, who had just broken through to level 25 a few minutes ago but had not yet chosen her advancement quest, as she wanted to choose very carefully after her brother made it clear to her the importance of the first path chosen. Even if she knew that her brother was tremendously powerful, Meng Qi could not help but feel apprehensive. However, how could she not feel that way? After fighting to exhaustion for so long and slaughtering so many enemies, the number of weaver ants did not seem to have decreased at all. It was already a miracle that a young girl like her who hadn't received any real training didn't despair. Little Snow was standing next to Xietain and Meng-Chi as she growled in the direction of the ants. All her hair was spiked up and her usually soft and kind blue eyes had practically turned red after killing so many enemies. "Don't worry, leave it to me." Xietain gave Meng-Chi a pat on the head and gently stroked the big white dog's hair with his other hand, much to the delight of both existences. Meng-Chi nodded without saying anything and Little Snow calmed down a bit as she felt the warmth of the hand stroking her. On the other hand, when Xietain looked at Sun Ling and Xia, he couldn't help but wonder. The two women seemed very calm and relaxed even in this kind of instance. Xia was another thing, as even up until now she had not revealed emotions on her face. Even when Xietain imposed his might in front of the weaver ants, the expression on her face did not change at all. As for Sun Ling, Xietain had no idea of the reason behind her confidence or lack of fear. Had she not realized that a single slip was all it took here for everyone to die horrible deaths? Be that as it may, it was true that while she was panting slightly, her eyes were as bright as ever. Xietain shook his head and turned his attention to the front. He noticed that the temperature had plummeted, so even without looking back or up he figured that Bing Shui was probably moments away from making her move. Bang! 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 Indeed, a few seconds after the temperature of the area fell and the ground beneath Xietan's feet acquired a light layer of frost, the resulting explosions of objects falling at high speed from the sky began to thunder and muffle the terrifying and chilling shrieks of the mutant ants at the rear and right of the group. Wow! Amazing! So this is the real power of this woman, Meng-Chi whispered with wide eyes as she looked back in shock. Meng-Chi had heard sincere and open praise for a woman from the person she least expected to hear it from, her brother. Therefore, she had always been curious to know what kind of person the woman named Bing Shui was. After meeting her, Meng-Chi admitted that Bing Shui's beauty was transcendental to the point where she felt that she had no match if they stood side by side in a charm competition, and even her character matched perfectly with her outward appearance. However, this was the first time she had seen Bing Shui making a large-scale move. Meng-Chi's heart not only trembled due to shock but also felt bitter as he realized the huge disparity between the two of them. Amazing! Sun Ling exclaimed in shock as her big black eyes reflected shining objects falling from the sky. To think that girl Bing Shui actually was so strong. Even the lifeless expression on Xiaoya's face broke for a second before returning to normal. Not even more than about 30 seconds had passed since the explosions had started when the shouts of joy and excited cheers coming from the right flank and rear of the group began to thunder in the middle of the forest so loudly that the trees and ground shook. Frost floated in the air and the ground had practically frozen over. Even the area where Xietain was standing became slightly affected by Bing Shui's skill. Xietain chuckled as he heard the bestial roars coming from the human throats, hailing the Ice Princess name with fervor. No. Xietain heard several calling her Ice Goddess. But how could they not be overjoyed after being released from the clutches of death and having been pointed out their path to survival? I guess I'll finish my part too, he muttered under his breath before taking a step forward. Under the shining eyes of Meng-Chi, who for fear of completely losing her self-confidence decided to stop looking at the fairy-like woman rising on an ice tree and instead decided to focus on seeing for the first time what her brother could do, Xietain stepped with moderate strength onto the ground beneath his feet and soared over 300 meters in an instant, activating gravity manipulation in reverse to slow his falling speed by a huge margin. Xietain immediately spotted two things. First, in a matter of a minute, Shangguan Bing Shui had slaughtered what was definitely over 100,000 weaver ants using ice bullets or ice pikes, and judging from her expression she seemed to be playing around, which was normal considering how high her mana stat was at the moment. After all, killing unclassified existences with low defense couldn't be easier. The second thing Xietain spotted caused every hair on his body to stand on end. Fuck their mother. Xietain couldn't help but curse under his breath at the sea of ants. No matter where Xietain looked, all he could see were ants. Even in the middle of the darkness, where his vision was somewhat limited, he could see beyond 500 meters past the area illuminated by the flares and skills of the mages. However, all that was there were ants waiting to replace future fallen ones. There were definitely more weaver ants than zombies on the bridge. Lucky for me, here I don't have to be careful to destroy anything, or otherwise I might die in this place if these ants spit all together. Xietain sighed as he seemed to hover in midair at his slow descending speed. Determined to put an end to this ant attack once and for all, Xietain immediately went to work. 2 tremendously strong and effective skills to wipe out armies but not affect allies? Definitely not gravity manipulation and crimson blood judgment. Even Xietain would end up getting damaged if he wasn't careful with those things, not to mention the others. On the other hand, I wonder what will happen if I use overlap regeneration and replace 90% of my strength for magic before casting blood manipulation. Xietain felt anxious to try it, so like an eager child he immediately set to work on revealing what the gift wrap hid. Coming out of the initial shock, the eyes of Sun Ling, Feng Hong, Feng Tianwu, Xia, and many other soul evolvers and soldiers located on the left flank and in the front were directed to the sky. There, they all noticed how Xietan's body was suddenly surrounded by a bright golden light, practically standing in the void and surrounded by a kind of golden halo. It had to be said that there were not a few who at that moment felt that Xietain was the representation in flesh and blood of how the gods were portrayed in illustrated books. Under the attentive, serious, admiring, appreciative eyes of those he was leading, Xietain raised his right hand and while looking out over the endless sea of weaver ants snapped his fingers. One time as his voice spread far and wide across the bloody battlefield. His voice was neither high nor low, yet for some strange reason, it was clearly heard by everyone even amidst the high-pitched shrieks of the weaver ants and the explosions resulting from the massacre Shangguan Bing Shui was carrying out. It was like the voice of God reaching out to the mortal world. Yes, it was like the decree of the Emperor of the Heavens. Die. Chapter 644 Favorite Son of Heaven. After converting 90% of his strength stat into magic, Xietain immediately felt as if a new world had opened up before him. The abrupt change in his magic stat allowed him to realize many things he had overlooked in the past, and he felt the magical power coursing through every nerve in his body at frighteningly high speeds. Xietain took a brief moment as his body was virtually suspended in the void space to observe his current status with the intention of trying to understand more about the weird but wonderful feeling he was experiencing. Xietain status points 20, level 50, race human, class blood berserker, subclass Lord, soul contract endless blue lotus flame, titles 1 hit to kill irregular brilliant mind savior of the world destroyer of destroyers 1 vs millions leader of Yanqing, strength 85 850 55 / agility 970 95 / health 687 20 / stamina 1240 35 / mana 751 65 / magic 1538 773 155 /n. The symbols are used to show the current stats after being modified when Xietain used overlap regeneration. Skills active blood manipulation, second order active skill, level 5 / crimson blood judgment, third order active skill, level 5 / regeneration, third order active skill, level 1 / shadow blink, first order active skill, level 1 / lightning movement, second order active skill, level 5 / invisibility, first order active skill, level 1 / Gravity Manipulation, 2nd Order Active Skill, Level 1/Void Fist, 3rd Order Active Skill, Level 1/All. For 1, 3rd Order Unique Skill, Level 5/War Cry, 2nd Order Active Skill, Level 5/Lonely Wolf Aura, 2nd Order Active Skill, Level 5. Passive, Special Forces Soldier, Unranked Passive Skill, Level 5/Immovable Heart, 4th Order Unique Skill, LVL 4/ Superhuman Health, 1st Order Passive Skill, Level 5/Silver Skin, 2nd Order Passive Skill, Level 1/ Mechanic, Unranked Passive Skill, Level 5/Throwing, Unranked Passive Skill, Level 5/God of War's Will, 3rd Order Passive Skill, Level 5/Blacksmithing, 1st Order Passive Skill, Level 5/Danger Sense, Unranked Passive Skill, Level 5/Enhanced Dexterity, 1st Order Passive Skill, Level 5/Blood Berserker's Wrath, Unique Skill, /Magic Break, 6th Order Passive Skill, Level 5. Even his weakest magical skill would surely have several times better effect not only in terms of damage, but in overall impact. However, what Xietain activated immediately after using Overlap Regeneration was not a weak magical skill at all, extending more than 50% of his mana in all directions. Xietain felt every little weed mending in the wind or being stomped on. He could notice the footsteps of each of the weaver ants, and after the ants fervently absorbed that mana which did not belong to them, Xietain could understand how agitated they were and how great was the murderous intent they felt just based on the blood flow of each mutant insect. Really wonderful. Wonderful and terrifying, Xietain thought. At the same time, he waved his hand as if slapping a fly and ordered, "Die." His tone of voice was very different from the tone of voice a person used when they wanted to announce or say something. The tone of voice Xietain used was the tone of voice people used when giving orders. In other words, he was ordering his enemies to die. For a second that seemed to last longer than it actually did, the battlefield fell into a strange phase of silence in which the high-pitched shrieks of the weaver ants abruptly stopped, and even the explosions resulting from Shangguan Bingshue's ice creations were no longer audible. Bang! Just when everyone was wondering what was going on, a bang sound that sounded different from all the others broke the silence. This bang sound was just like the sound of a soccer ball exploding after receiving a lot of air, making it very different from the bang of two hard objects colliding such as ice and earth. However, where did the sound come from? Everyone tried to find the source, but none of them succeeded. Bang! Soon, there was a second explosion, but unlike the previous time, this time things didn't stop there even for a second. Bang! 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 Dozens of explosions turned into hundreds, and hundreds soon turned into thousands. In just 2 or 3 seconds, thousands turned into tens of thousands, and that number kept increasing with every passing fraction of a second. During the first few seconds, there were no soul evolvers who realized what was happening, nor were there any of them who could explain with clarity where the explosions were coming from. Sometimes they occurred in the front, other times it was on the right or left flank, and sometimes they happened at the rear of the group. However, there was something that everyone understood even though they did not understand how such a thing was possible. The cause was undoubtedly the young man who was still more than 200 meters above the ground. Boom, boom, boom. Suddenly, the sound changed. Instead of hearing several smaller bangs, constantly like a machine gun firing, a much louder explosion shook the atmosphere of the place with such power that several distant trees began to sway as if they had been whipped by strong winds. It was then that some finally realized what was happening. The ants! Sun Ling exclaimed in shock as she watched the scene in front of her with her beautiful eyes wide open. If there were any soul evolvers who had not yet realized what was really going on, Sun Ling's voice and her words were the decisive markers. from the north, from the east, from the west, and from the south. Huge clouds of dark-colored blood rose into the sky. Pieces of shattered exoskeletons flew everywhere as a downpour of blood began to rain down on tree trunks and the ground or fell on the bodies of other weaver ants, before those same weaver ants exploded in such a way that their exoskeleton and blood joined those of their peers. 100,000, 200,000, 500,000, 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million. In just 10 breaths of time, all the mutant weaver ants that had stepped within a range of 2,000 meters around the human group disappeared. However, they did not disappear completely, as they effectively left traces of their existence behind. The formerly brown tree trunks had now taken on a greenish tinge, and a viscous liquid slid down the surface to the ground. The pure green leaves began to sizzle as the acidic blood rained down on them, and areas of the ground where there had been especially high concentrations of mutant blood began to steam. The small fragments of exoskeletons that had once made up bodies came together to form small, creepy-looking mountains, and a dense venomous cloud encircled the human group, approaching slowly but surely in a threatening manner. And yet, despite knowing that their lives were in danger, none of the soul evolvers or soldiers said a single word or moved from their place. No, instead of saying that they said nothing or did not move, it would probably be more correct to say that none of them could move a single muscle of their bodies as they watched in shock the living hell in front of them. The disbelief they all felt was so great that they did not even have time to feel fear. The disbelief of all of them stemmed from the fact that even though they knew who was the cause of all this, it was hard for them to accept it. Their rational brains could not accept it. Even Shangguan Bing Shui, who was the sole evolver present who knew Bai Zemin's strength best, trembled standing in place. She had thought that she had closed the distance between them, and indeed she had. At the very least, Shangguan Bing Shui no longer despaired of helplessness. It was just that the disparity was so big that there seemed to be no way to really close it. Sun Ling had come with the intention of observing Bai Zemin to later decide whether he was worthy to lead or not. However, as she lifted her head stiffly and looked at that young man whose night-black hair swayed gently 100 meters high, Sun Ling realized how kind he was being to give everyone in the Chinese Renaissance a chance. She became aware of how great was the favor her daughter Wu Yijuan did them. You. What are you? She muttered with her mouth dry and her big eyes fixed on him. Human? Not only did Sun Ling not believe that a human could do such a thing, but none of the soul evolvers present believed it. There were not a few who slowly began to think that maybe that black-haired young man could be the reincarnation of the god of war. What am I? Bai Zemin muttered under his breath the same question he had asked himself several times. At the same time, he activated Shadow Blink to jump into the shadow of a tree 50 meters away. Then, he kicked the tree trunk and soared into the sky again, reaching 500 meters high in an instant. He did not immediately answer Wu Yijuan's mother's not-so-peculiar question and instead looked down, trying to focus his eyes as much as possible on the darkness beyond the 2,000 meters of illumination. There, he managed to see glowing little eyes staring at him with murderous intent, and Bai Zemin soon realized that all those weaver ants that didn't die should be first-order mutant insects at the very least. However, he was not worried, as he had to some extent expected something like that to happen. At the end of the day, there was no way that such a dispersed and weak attack could wipe out the lives of existences that were in the same order he was in. Even so, all of the surviving weaver ants finally seemed to receive some sort of order, as none of them advanced any further, even though they did not retreat either. Bai Zemin raised a hand towards the sky, and his body was soon enveloped by that bright halo of golden light, giving him the appearance of a true god in the eyes of those who raised their heads to look up at the sky, still unable to believe what they were witnessing. After he activated overlap regeneration to turn strength into magic, Bai Zemin lowered his hand to point forward and activated blood manipulation again. I am me. His words, meant to answer Sun Ling's earlier question, resounded amidst the silence. However, only Bai Zemin knew that those words were meant to reassure himself of his identity. Then, as his voice faded, the toxic blood fog suddenly stopped advancing. Even more terrifying, the blood that had stained all the surroundings began to move like slime. Slime which soon evaporated and joined the toxic blood fog, making it denser and more terrifying than before. Xietain again waved his hand in the wind, and in response the toxic blood fog exploded with lightning speed outward, spreading into a ring shape and completely covering all the surviving weaver ants. As they inhaled the toxin fog, nothing happened to them as their systems were immune. After all, it was in their blood from birth. However, the terror was yet to come. A high-pitched screech sounded in the middle of the forest as a first-order weaver ant began to writhe on the ground. However, not a second later, all its movements stopped as blood began to flow from its mouth and eyes. As if it was the advent of the apocalypse, all the first-order weaver ants, numbering easily several thousand, shrieked sharply and writhed on the ground, before falling into pools of their own blood. Lilith observed Xietain, still enveloped by the halo of golden light, standing in the void with his arm still extended forward. His black hair had taken on a slight blonde tone and his face had gained some sanctity that did not correspond to the massacre he had just carried out. Then, she looked down at the ground and sighed as she saw the eyes that everyone used to look up at the sky. They were no longer looking at a human being. How could a mere human, a mortal, be able to wipe out millions in less than a minute by simply waving a hand in the wind? They truly believed they were looking at a god, the favorite son of the heavens. With 3 seconds left before the deactivation of overlap regeneration and still being surrounded by that wonderful golden light that made him feel as if he was in complete control of his entire being, Xietain stared straight ahead with indifference on his face, trying to find the commander of the enemy's army. However, even someone like him couldn't help but be distracted when something he didn't expect occurred. Xietain. No one knew who started it, however, in an instant, they all began to shout with fervor the name of the one they now worshipped as the god who had descended to the world of humans to restore the peace that had been taken from their lives. Chapter 645, Good Eyes Bad Eyes. The expression on Xietan's face was really interesting to appreciate as he listened to the loud exclamations of the soul evolvers and soldiers more than 300 meters below him. What's wrong with these people? He muttered dumbfounded as if he really didn't understand what was going on. Lilith rolled her eyes and growled under her breath, Forget about them, even I am stupefied by what I just saw. You think that witnessing an army of millions being annihilated in less than 60 seconds is something that can be seen every day? Xietain frowned and said in confusion, but hadn't they already? Suddenly, he stopped after realizing that in the heat of the moment he had forgotten something important. He face-palmed and muttered to himself, Shit, I forgot that these guys aren't the soul evolvers of my transcendent faction. Because everyone was listening to him and following his words to the letter. Xietain had partially forgotten that the people he was leading this time were not the subordinates who had witnessed his power on several occasions. Besides, all the soul evolvers and even the normal soldiers were performing so well that Xietain mistakenly assumed that they all knew that with him present nothing bad would happen. Lilith was a bit speechless as she looked at him as if she was looking at an alien even though, ironically she was one. Whatever. I can't find the commander of the weaver ants. Xietain shook his head as the effect of overlap regeneration ended. He had used the second activation of regeneration twice in a row, so Xietain estimated that he had 8 more times to use it in a day before his soul began to suffer in silence. The first activation was to boost his magical power, increase the area of effectiveness of his skills, etc. The second time was to repeat all of the above but also to turn the blood he had leaked into the organisms of the first-order weaver ants into deadly threads that destroyed the creature's internal organs in milliseconds. Xietain deactivated gravity manipulation and as a consequence his body began to plummet, reaching the ground in moments. Despite the altitude of a few hundred meters, Xietain managed to somehow make almost no sound when his feet touched solid ground. What he encountered when he arrived in front of the human group were looks of fear mixed with adoration and admiration that seemed to come from deep within their souls. Even now, the words by Xietain still echoed noisily within the forest. Silence! By Xietain roared with a serious expression on his face. His voice at this moment was no different from the voice of God to the ears of those present. Even if By Xietain whispered a word, it was highly likely that everyone would hear him and follow his command, not to mention him roaring in such a manner. His eyes swept over everyone, and after several seconds of silence, he said in a deep voice, "Have you forgotten where we are? We are in unknown territory where the enemies are hiding in the shadows, watching for us. Have you forgotten the training you received?" Everyone lowered their heads in shame at being reprimanded in such a manner, and although many wanted to say that it was actually impossible for anything bad to happen with him present, no one dared to disrespect the divine entity in front of them. By Xietain nodded in satisfaction before quietly ordering, "Form groups of 10 men with at least half of them exceeding level 15 and immediately start collecting the soul stones we got from this battle. However, do not go further than 1,500 meters and keep the illumination on at all times." Without delay, the 4 guild leaders set about carrying out By Xiein's orders. In addition, Nangonglingxin, Kaijingi, Zhongda, and Shenhe separated at different angles and prepared to assist in any kind of ambush that might happen. Shangguan Bing Shui and Wu Yijuan approached By Xieinmin with rather calm expressions compared to most. "Can you already master that power?" Shangguan Bing Shui asked in a low voice once she reached his side. "To a certain extent, you might say." By Xieinmin nodded slightly and calmly explained, "With my skill reaching the peak of the 2nd stage, the amount of information and knowledge I gained was not only about the blood element itself but also about how to make it react to my mana in a way that allows me to annihilate with relative ease those with pitifully low soul power." "That's great!" Wu Yijuan exclaimed in a low voice as she looked at By Xieinmin with eyes brimming with adoration and admiration. "Even if this kind of attack only works on unclassified existences, most of the enemies we will face in the near future will be unclassified existences. Armies and numbers will not be a hindrance to you at all. You will be able to rule the country in a matter of months." Shangguan Bing Shui and By Xieinmin looked at each other and both saw the joy and excitement in each other's eyes after hearing Wu Yijuan's words. With the high agility they both had, as well as the ability to crush entire armies using their core skills, the seemingly distant dream of once again uniting all of China's mankind under a single standard now seemed to be just around the corner. Shangguan Bing Shui subconsciously clenched her delicate fists and gently gritted her teeth. She knew that with her and By Xieinmin's power at the head, practically any obstacle that stood in the way of the transcendent faction's growth would be crushed immediately. This meant that she might soon have to make an important decision that could have repercussions for the rest of her life. That crucial moment she had dreamed about for years was finally within her grasp. By Xieinmin and Wu Yijuan noticed the struggle in Shangguan Bing Shui's eyes. However, all they could do was silently support her morally. Only Shangguan Bing Shui could make this kind of decision and no one else but her. Suddenly, By Xieinmin and the 2 women felt a series of light footsteps approaching, so all 3 of them turned around at the same time. The 2 people approaching were Wu Yijuan's mother, Sun Ling, and the other was Xiaoya, who was following Sun Ling as her shadow. The expression on Xiaoya's face was neutral, so it was hard to tell exactly what was going on in her head. She had probably made use of the time that had just passed to calm down enough to be able to act composed on the surface at least. As for Sun Ling, she was looking at By Xieinmin with an extremely complicated expression on her face. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that the person who came to our base a week ago, acting like a warrior in search of a safe haven, would actually be this powerful? She sighed and shook her head gently. Really, there are mountains above mountains and people above people. Sun Ling was tremendously powerful on her own, so much so that even if she couldn't defeat a second-order existence, she was confident that if she wanted to flee, not even the most powerful existence in the world would be able to stop her. She also thought that her husband Wu Keqian's power was already terrifying. She had seen him destroy an enemy armored tank with his bare hands as if he was tearing paper. However, now that she was looking at the young man in front of her, Sun Ling realized what real power was. In the face of real and overwhelming power, the enemy's numbers and ability didn't matter. Everything would be turned into clouds of smoke with a simple wave of hands. "Aunt Sun, I may be strong now. But do you know how many times I nearly died in such a short time?" Bai Zemin shook his head as he understood Wu Yijuan's mother's feelings, and said with a sigh, "The first enemy I faced, far from being a slow and relatively weak level 1 zombie, was a level 5 flying-type mutant insect. If not for luck being on my side at the time, a level 0 existence like me wouldn't even have been able to leave the university's male dorm facility. Level 5. Sun Ling whispered bitterly and forced a smile as she said softly, "I thought it was already amazing for me to kill a level 3 zombie, but your first kill was a flying creature that surpassed you by so many levels. I had to kill hundreds of zombies to get out of the male dormitory, and if not for the fortune of fate I managed to get hold of a rare grade sword. The level 25 mantis outside would have cut my head off without even giving me time to feel pain," Bai Zemin said calmly, shocking the 4 women to the point that even Xiaoya looked at him in utter shock. You killed a level 25 mutant beast on day 1? Shangguan Bingshui looked at him with wide eyes as this was the first time she had heard something like this. Although that mantis hadn't evolved to first order yet. Bai Zemin sighed and said in a complicated voice, "If it wasn't for me saving all my status points for emergency situations, the difference in agility between that mantis and me would have become the reason for my death." Everyone was silent for several seconds as they thought about how many dangers they had faced. They had all been on the brink of death at least one time. But something like facing an existence on the brink of evolution on day 1 was far more than they could imagine. Bai Zemin finally looked at Sun Ling and said calmly, "I am strong, that's a fact. But this strength I have because I risked enough to earn it. While many slept comfortably in their beds, I spent entire nights hunting alone and fighting enemies that surpassed my level by more than a few. The number of injuries my body suffered has been so many that were it not for my fast evolution and high health, every centimeter of my skin would be deformed with gruesome scars." What Bai Zemin meant by his words was that he had already lost a lot and sacrificed so much for the sake of having the strength he had today. Therefore, unless others were willing to lose everything, they should not look at him with envy, far from it. At the end of the day, while it was true that he was lucky in several situations, luck only played a certain role, but it was Bai Zemin who fought with tooth and nail not to be dragged into the foxhole of death. Sun Ling smiled slightly after understanding the meaning behind his words and nodded silently. She looked at him before looking at her daughter and saying proudly, "In the past, I was proud of my foresight. I always believed that I, Sun Ling, was a woman with great eyes for men since not only before the apocalypse the man I chose was talented but even after the world changed he became someone indispensable. However, today I must admit defeat. My beautiful princess has the best eyes of all after all. Not only did she choose as her future husband a handsome and charming young man, but her future husband will be the founding father of the new motherland." Sun Ling nodded satisfied and proud as if it was not Wu Yijuan who had set her eyes on Bai Zemin but herself. "Young, strong, ambitious. Fight hard, my dear. I don't think this little brat won't fall for your charms. After all, you are the daughter of me, Sun Ling." Wu Yijuan blushed slightly but said nothing and instead secretly looked at Bai Zemin wanting to see his reaction to her mother's words. Haha. Bai Zemin gave a slightly awkward laugh but didn't say anything as he didn't want to hurt Wu Yijuan. At the end of the day, things between the two were clear, so there was little he could do here. As for Shangguan Bingshui, she shook her head not knowing whether to laugh or cry. She admired Wu Yijuan's tenacity and willingness to put aside her pride to chase after a man who might never reciprocate her love, unfortunately or not. That kind of bravery was something Shangguan Bingshui did not possess and probably never would. At the end of the day, Shangguan Bingshui had always been a proud woman. It could be said that pride was the foundation of her being. throwing away her pride would be no different than throwing away her very existence. On the other hand, while the small group was chatting, there was a person who, while making sure to pick up the highest quality soul stones, was also paying attention in that direction. However, upon hearing Sun Ling's words praising Wu Yijuan's eyes, this person could not help but force a smile into her heart. If Wu Yijuan had good eyes, then didn't this mean that she had mouse eyes? Chapter 646 Sense of Imminent Danger. For obvious reasons, neither Bai Zemin nor anyone else present counted the number of soul stones they picked up from the ground. After all, it was impossible for them to do such a thing in the middle of a forest crowded with mutant beasts, mutant insects, and mutant plants lurking in the shadows waiting for the right moment to pounce on them and devour their bodies and soul power. However, not knowing the exact number did not mean that everyone present was unaware of the great treasure they had managed to obtain on this occasion. Even if we leave now without exploring the 5 pagodas, this trip was definitely worth it. Feng Hong laughed proudly and pointed out, among all these soul stones, there must be at least 200,000 or 300,000. There might even be several hundred of first-order soul stones. This many soul stones alone could compare to the entire treasure of our Chinese rebirth faction. Huang Tian chuckled as he received some medical treatment since he had been injured in the previous battle. Teng Hua petted his tame snake and fed it a piece of mutant meat as he agreed, I must say, to get all the spoils of war with only a few wounded and 0 deaths. It's like I'm dreaming. This kind of battle is one where it would be a miracle if one of us managed to escape alive under normal circumstances. GGG. Liang Jing laughed like some kind of creepy witch, but his voice was brimming with admiration as he said in a raspy voice, isn't this all thanks to our wonderful team leader Bai? Who would have thought that a human could achieve such a level of might in 3 months of evolution? Everyone nodded, and it didn't take an overly attentive person to realize that even the 4 guild leaders were looking at Bai Zemin with admiration and appreciation. If before they followed him because of orders from the higher-ups and because they knew he was the strongest among those present, then his demonstration of power about half an hour ago and his ability to keep them all alive won the hearts of each of the soul evolvers and soldiers present. Under the eyes of everyone, Bai Zemin took a step forward and with a wave of his hand all the soul stones that had formed several small mountains that flashed with bright lights disappeared without a trace. This? Feng Hong was startled at the sight of something so fairy-like. Ggag cough. 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 Liang Jing wanted to act like it was normal, but the coughing wouldn't leave him and his face soon turned red as if he was having trouble breathing. Fortunately, and I left several things at home or my ring wouldn't have been able to keep all this. Bai Zemin rejoiced before turning around and ordering in a firm voice, we are moving. Remember to keep formation, the Weaver ants have not yet been defeated. We also can't discount the fact that we're not just facing mutant ants here. Since the army general had not been defeated, Bai Zemin did not believe that this would be over just like that. Therefore, to avoid any problems he would rather keep his guard up. Even he did not dare to underestimate the full strength of a first or second order mutant Weaver ant. The group soon resumed their advance in a southerly direction, moving deeper into the mountain range. While they had brought plenty of ammunition, it had all been expended in the previous long war, so the once useful soldiers now had no choice but to move to the center of the formation and were reduced to nothing more than support party carrying tents, food, tools, and all manner of military logistical goods to facilitate exploration and survival in the forests. However, the group did not feel the loss of the rapid-fire support from the armed soldiers too much. After all, thanks to the support of people like Bai Zemin, Chen He, Shangguanbing Shui, Wu Yijuan, and the 4 guild leaders, all the soul evolvers had reached at least level 18 and not a few had broken beyond level 20. The only thing that was a bit cumbersome was that since the group also had normal humans and due to the terrain, it was impossible to advance at high speeds. Therefore, even after walking for a full hour, they still hadn't even come close to reaching the destination they were aiming for. In fact, to reach the 5 pagodas starting from Xingshou town, Tourists who loved mountain climbing and craved nature often took up to 2 or 3 hours in the past world, where the distances were shorter. Therefore, even after walking for 5 hours almost without a break, the group still had not reached the 5 pagodas. "Big brother, is something wrong?" Meng-Chi asked with some hesitation after being silent for over 1 hour. She had noticed that not only did her brother have a slight frown on his face, but even Shangguan Bingshui did. Since the two of them were the most powerful people in the entire team, Meng-Chi had been watching them with the intention of noticing small changes in their expressions that would reveal when something might be going wrong. "It's weird." Bai Zemin muttered under his breath and stopped in his tracks, causing everyone to stop behind him and look at him in confusion. Suddenly, he looked at Shangguan Bingshui and asked in a serious voice, "Did you notice it too?" "Yeah," Shangguan Bingshui nodded and said somewhat coldly, "During the whole route, we have faced more than 10,000 mutant beasts, and there were also not a few mutant plants that attacked us." After not listening to Xietain, but curiously, no weaver ant appeared again. Weaver ants are very territorial creatures and also vengeful. We have killed millions of them, but surprisingly no second-order weaver ants popped up among the killed ones, and the number of first-order weaver ants wasn't too high either. Bai Zemin said in a low voice as he looked at the surroundings with some caution. "I refuse to believe that the general or generals of the previous army just gave up just like that." As a biology student, Bai Zemin knew a lot about green life and for some reason he was beginning to feel uneasy. He rarely felt uncomfortable to the point where the expression on his face showed it, but now, each step forward he took seemed to feel heavier, as if his body was trying to speak to him with clear signals. The current Bai Zemin was no longer that Bai Zemin who knew nothing of the world. The current Bai Zemin was the leader of a faction composed of over 30,000 survivors and the top leader of armies, of several thousand armed soldiers and over 4,000 soul evolvers with great potential to grow. Therefore, he knew that as a leader and general, even in the worst circumstances he should not show any worries as this would affect the morale and fighting spirit of the troops behind him. Precisely because they knew the kind of person Bai Zemin was, Shangguan Bingshui exchanged glances with Chen He, Wu Yijun, Zhong De, Nangong Lingxin, and Kai Jingyi. All of them were becoming more and more serious and tensed as if they were about to face a great enemy. Seeing the change in the expressions of several of the most powerful people present, the others also began to realize that something was not right. Even the indifferent Xietain did not dare to act relaxed at this point, and the playful Sun Ling had a rare, serious expression on her face. After thinking for a moment, Bai Zemin finally waved his hand and the storage ring on his index finger flashed, with a sparkle of purple light before turning off. Under the attentive and confused eyes of everyone, several thousand soul stones appeared on the ground before them, releasing faint beautiful glows and forming a kind of rainbow with their varied colors. "All of you, I want you to take these soul stones and start evolving your skills as much as you can," Bai Zemin commanded with a deep voice that left no room for argument. "If any of you can still evolve a skill further and the cost for it is made up of unclassified or first order soul stones, let me know and I will see what I can do." The words spoken by Bai Zemin were proof of how serious the situation was. He would definitely not give soul stones to anyone who was not his actual subordinate or who was not under his control in some way or another, much less strengthen a group of soul evolvers who did not yet belong to his faction and who, if the worst came to the worst, he might have to kill. However, he really felt uneasy, so he was willing to do anything to calm that uneasiness. People like Feng Hong, Feng Tianwu, Huang Tian, Teng Hua, Liang Jing, Sun Ling, Xia, and those who had been fighting alongside Bai Zemin for a long time already could not be shaken by unclassified soul stones. They were strong enough or possessed sufficient status to obtain such soul stones and evolve the skills that required them, so any skill whose evolution requirement was unclassified soul stones had already been evolved long ago. However, the same could not be said for all those present. The 99% of the soul evolvers present did not hesitate in taking a step forward to get soul stones and start evolving whatever passive or active skills they had left to evolve. After all, soul stones were too precious treasures, so except for a handful of privileged people, none of them could own one just because the monster they killed had a soul stone. If they were discovered doing it, they might even be expelled from the establishment, which would eventually result in their deaths. Therefore, now that they were being offered on a silver platter the chance to become stronger, none of them wasted even a second talking nonsense. About 1 hour later, Xietain had supplied each soul evolver with an average of 60 unclassified soul stones, and at least 5 first-order soul stones. Considering that the number of soul evolvers present was just a little less than 400, the number of soul stones that were consumed in that short amount of time was by no means small. Xietain even looked inside his storage ring to confirm that any of all the skill scrolls that could increase the safety of Meng Qi had already been handed over to his family, despite knowing that there were no longer any strong skill scrolls with him. After thinking for a moment, Xietain even took out various swords, spears, bows, maces, leather armor, plate armor, shields, chains, and all sorts of equipment he obtained after slaughtering countless members of the Azura race. Xietain didn't know if he was feeling nervous about nothing or not, but he believed that the practically superhuman instinct that had accompanied him all his life and helped him countless times would definitely not fail him now. When he handed these objects over to the soul evolvers and soldiers, they all looked at him with burning fervor, and their admiration for Xietain grew to levels never seen before. In fact, even though they were all aware that for someone as strong as him to be being so cautious meant that great danger was probably looming, feeling how they were becoming more powerful just by standing following his back made over 90% of those present swear in their hearts to follow Xietain all the way to the grave. Move. Xietain waved his hand and turned around, walking forward with resolution in every step he took. Yes. With new resolve in their hearts, they all shouted as they followed their leader with increasing fighting intent. Lilith watched the advance of the human troops, and as her ruby eyes focused on the back of the man leading them forward with courage, she couldn't help but sigh. She had seen the growth of Xietain from the very second number 1 to this point. She had seen the changes in his attitude, the growth in his character, the reaffirmation after reaffirmation on his resolve, his strengthening. She had seen practically each and every step he took forward. However, what Lilith was most relieved and proud of was that although Xietain was basically a god among humans, he did not let that strength go to his head. This was what she feared the most, but what thanks to her constant intervention and warning he did not forget and kept in mind. Who knows? That caution and wariness, despite being so powerful, could save his life and the lives of many of his loved ones or subordinates who trusted in his leadership. Chapter 647 Mysterious Earth on the verge of evolving completely. The group advanced for another 2 hours, and although it was not possible to see the sun from the forest as the high treetops shielded the interior as if it were a world apart from the rest, in reality, it was not difficult to estimate that it was already dark even without looking at the clock. To begin with, the temperature had dropped enough for the normal soldiers to start shivering with cold, and as if the above wasn't enough of an indication, the howls, growls, and roars of the mutant beasts that were usually quieter during the day had now become unusually active. Xietain, wouldn't it be better to stop and set up the camp over here? Sun Ling couldn't help but interfere as she saw that the young man leading everyone had no intention of stopping. No, Xietain replied firmly without looking back. Setting up camp in the middle of the forest I don't think is a good idea. Even if we set up guard all night, our enemies may appear from above and even from underground. But at this rate everyone will be more exhausted to fight tomorrow. Sun Ling reasoned with a slight frown. They will be able to rest once we reach the summit. It's not like it will be long anyway. We've already walked so far, so walking another 2 hours won't be the reason for total exhaustion. He continued without hesitation, once we reach the 5 pagodas, we will finally be able to see the sky again. Our enemies will have no cover, and instead of being attacked from all sides, at least we will only have to defend ourselves against normal land creatures, or at worst a few flying ones. Sun Ling still wanted to say something again, but Shangguan Bingshui shook her head and stopped her. Once he makes a decision, even the most stubborn mule in the world cannot compare to him. Sun Ling forced a smile and shook her head as she said in a low voice, "Forget it. He definitely has more experience than me in going into mutant forests. He should definitely know what he's doing." The group continued to move forward slowly. However, Bai Zemin did not count on the fact that they would have to stop several times to allow the normal soldiers to have some warm mutant meat soup to keep them from freezing. In the end, all he could do was give each of them several hides of mutant beasts that had already dried out to cover their bodies, since the cold during the night was really unbearable unless one was covered by a strong shelter or some kind of clothing that had mana around it. "All thanks to you, girl." Bai Zemin gently tousled Meng Qi's hair and praised her with sincerity. "If not for you warning me beforehand about the non-evolved ones, now I might be in some trouble." Bai Zemin was used to going into the forests by himself or with soul evolvers. He rarely allowed armed soldiers who had not evolved to venture into such dangerous areas, let alone in the middle of the night. Hee hee. Meng Qi smiled sweetly and did not seem at all worried about the current situation. Throughout the entire journey, while they had been attacked practically without a break, with so many strong people taking the reins, there was no need for Bai Zemin to personally step forward every time. Therefore, he had been able to take some time off to help his younger sister choose the most suitable class for her, with Lilith's secret help, of course, based on the rarity of the name and its characteristics. In the end, the class that Meng Qi chose as her first-order job, the first path she would have to walk to find her destiny, had the name of World Guru. Unfortunately, Bai Zemin did not have a rune book, so it was not possible for Meng Qi to become a rune master right now, and would probably have to wait for the future when he managed to get his hands on a rune book. Approximately 3 hours later, around midnight, the human group led by Bai Zemin at the head finally managed to spot the target they had been searching for since morning, with lightning and flares illuminating the front to the point where even a normal human could see a building. More than 2 kilometers ahead, Bai Zemin stopped after reaching the top of one of the most remote mountains in the forest. In the distance, with the starry sky as a blanket and clear of any kind of plant or mutant beast, there were 5 huge silver pagodas towering several hundred meters into the sky. Although they were clearly not from this era, their construction had been sufficiently detailed and meticulous that regardless of the era they could be appreciated for their beauty. The 5 silver pagodas released a strange aura of ancientness and oppression that seemed to drive away all living things by their presence alone, and the big stone lion statues were like guardians protecting them. Suddenly, however, just as everyone sighed in relief to finally reach the destination this mission indicated and secretly admired the magnificent structures a little more than a kilometer distant, a shocking event occurred. The night sky that was covered by stars suddenly began to light up, and the white stars were soon dimmed to the point where they were no longer visible. The dark blanket that represented mystery, danger, and beauty was soon replaced by a large and seemingly boundless blanket of blue. Even the bright full moon that reigned in the skydome was replaced by the usurping Yellow King, who did not seem to be patient enough to wait for its turn. It became the day? How is this possible? The tactical compass clearly says it's after 0 o'clock at night. Didn't something similar happen several days ago, when suddenly the sky darkened even though we were just approaching noon? The soldiers and soul evolvers immediately became agitated and started muttering nervously. They all clutched their weapons tightly and looked at the surroundings with increasing caution, as they knew well that any unexpected change in the middle of a mountain range surrounded by mutant forests definitely did not bode well. "Move!" Bai Zemin shouted loudly and quickened his pace as he commanded in a deep voice, "Pick up the pace. After reaching the 5 silver pagoda square, don't relax and secure a 500-meter perimeter immediately." None dared to delay, and with serious expressions began to move faster. Even the normal soldiers, who were quite exhausted after walking for so many hours and after fighting such a tiring war, did not dare to complain and walked as fast as their legs would allow them to. "Will the earth undergo changes again?" Wu Yijuan asked quietly with some apprehension in her voice. "Something like this happened before the world expanded in size. Sun Ling pointed out in a serious voice. The only difference is that back then day turned into night but now night turned into day. The surrounding mana is increasing again? No, it seems to be higher than that time. Chen He frowned and noticed another big change not long after. Bai Zemin said nothing and simply focused on moving forward. Now he had a rough idea of the reason why he might be feeling so anxious all this time. When day turned to night about half a month ago, the earth expanded. Now, night turned into day, so it was natural to expect some kind of noticeable change. According to what Lilith had once told him, when a world was about to evolve, day and night would replace each other for several minutes. Moreover, Bai Zemin felt that she wanted to say something more important, but probably due to the rules of the soul record she was not allowed to say, so he was expecting something big on this occasion. Even if he didn't know exactly what was coming, at least he wouldn't be caught with his pants completely down. In 3 or 4 minutes, the group closed the distance between them and the 5 pagodas, but the sky was still as clear as day even though it was midnight time. It was no surprise to anyone that during the last few minutes there were no mutant beasts attacking them. It seemed that the pagodas were really not normal, as they seemed to somehow keep the dangerous beasts away apart from the fact that they did not collapse when the whole world shook. Taking advantage of the sunlight, everyone set up the tents as fast as possible and established a secure perimeter as Bai Zemin had ordered before. Explosives were placed everywhere and Bai Zemin even took out 2 Type 88 light machine guns from his storage ring. After some simple but clear orders, 50% of them retired to rest while the other 50% stayed awake to stand guard for 4 hours before it was their turn to rest. As for Bai Zemin, he and almost all the strongest members of this operation remained awake. As existences that had surpassed level 30 at the minimum, all of them were able to not be affected so much just by not sleeping for a day or 2. They walked through the round square built of limestone, and as they advanced to the 5 pagodas, Wu Yijuan couldn't help but look at the ground beneath their feet curiously. How weird. Were these lines always here? She said as she pointed downwards. Bai Zemin and the others stopped as they heard the words spoken by Wu Yijuan. They had all been focused on the pagodas as the 5 of them seemed to be the center of everything, so they had inadvertently overlooked the stone square. Ah! Big Sister Yijuan is right. Meng Qi exclaimed with wonder in her sweet voice. She looked at Bai Zemin with surprise and tried to recall past events as she said, "Big brother, do you remember when we visited the Yinxing Temple just before you went to college?" Bai Zemin frowned and nodded. Actually, I remember we climbed the mountain back then. It was the first and last time we visited Xingshou. Unfortunately, my attention was on the pagodas and lion statues, not on the square. I clearly remember that these lines were definitely not there. Meng Qi said with certitude. Bai Zemin looked at the ground beneath his feet and noticed that there were indeed many deep lines that no one in their right mind would make unless the architects wanted to cause visitors to fall. Indeed, it is a bit weird, he said with a slight frown. Let's check the pagodas first. Shangguan Bing Shui interjected. Let's take advantage of the light we have now to explore and observe as much as we can before night descends again. We can draw conclusions and theories later. Right. Bai Zemin agreed with Shangguan Bing Shui and soon ordered the group to move. After all, it didn't make much sense to stand around and watch helplessly for a few lines. Meng Qi stood back for a few more seconds, staring at the lines with a frown before shaking her head and following the group. She was weak compared to all of them and her only real ability, and probably the only way she had to help, was her language comprehension skill, so she would try to be as helpful as possible. I think it's a magic circle, Meng Qi said as she caught up to Bai Zemin. A magic circle? Bai Zemin was surprised, however, soon his eyes lit up with understanding. Look, the entire square is surrounded by small lines that seem to form ancient engravings, but curiously there are several thicker straight lines that are linked to the 4 pagodas surrounding the pagoda in the middle, Meng Qi pointed out under her breath. We'll probably find something in the pagodas. And if not, then maybe it can help if we can find a way to see the whole square from a great height. All right. Let's look at the pagodas first to take advantage of the light. Tomorrow we can continue on this. Xietain smiled slightly and stroked the top of Ming Qi's head gratefully. Meanwhile, Lilith watched the clearly unnaturally bright sky, and as she felt the abrupt increase of mana in the surroundings, she sighed. She couldn't help but look at Xietain and felt that he really had bad luck. To think that this little boy would be in such a dangerous area just when his world is about to evolve, she whispered in a voice that only she could hear. Then, Lilith looked down at the stone square from the sky and her eyes flashed weirdly as she said in a low voice, "But it really does confirm the words Lucifer said back then. It looks like this little planet Earth really has a lot of good things to offer. First, that thing under the sea, and now this." Chapter 648 Ancient Ruins, Part 1. Upon reaching the first pagoda located more on the left side of the stone square, the group immediately rushed to the huge metal gate and by nature, he stepped forward in an attempt to open it. "Stop!" Shangguan Bing Shui shouted in an anxious and authoritative tone of voice. He's hand froze in midair and looked at Shangguan Bing Shui over his shoulder puzzled. "Is something wrong? Idiot Chen, are you forgetting that this place is far from normal?" Kai Jingyi shook her head as she moved her index finger from left to right and laughed quietly. These pagodas endured shaking strong enough to be compared to historic scale earthquakes, and now we just found out that this place is likely surrounded by a huge magic circle. If you touch these things without being careful, you might die without knowing how such a thing happened. At least don't involve me please, there are still many things I want to do in my life. Chen He's face changed and he subconsciously jumped backward nimbly to put some distance between him and the huge double door of the pagoda as if he was afraid that a terrifying monster would come out from inside. "Sorry. I was a bit anxious and didn't think too much about the consequences." He apologized honestly as he realized his carelessness. "It doesn't matter. To be honest, probably most here would have done the same." Zhongde shrugged his shoulders and admitted, "If it wasn't for you being ahead of me, the person in your place would have been me. That's why strength-type soul evolvers are no good." Nangong Lingxin murmured under her breath, inadvertently drawing angry glares from Huang Tian, who was also a strength-based soul evolver. Xietain shook his head and took a step forward. "All of you stay back." Upon reaching the door, he looked at Shangguan Bing Shui and without needing words she understood his intention, as she immediately raised several ice walls for safety. Even Nangong Lingxin activated her magical energy barrier to support in the defense. At the end of the day, it was true that no one knew what might happen next. It never hurt to be a little cautious, let alone considering the place they were in. "Big brother, be careful," Ming Qi pleaded anxiously. She had just barely gotten back together with one of the people she loved most on the face of the earth, so if something bad happened to him she probably wouldn't be able to take the blow. Even little Snow grunted under her breath as if to express her heartaches as she could also feel that something bad might happen soon based on the atmosphere around her. "Don't worry." Xietain nodded calmly before turning his attention to the double door that was over 4 meters tall and at least 50 meters wide. After making sure of the security measures, he took a deep breath and brought both hands to the doors before pushing inward with moderate force. Surprisingly, the doors didn't even move. "Forget about opening. Maybe I didn't use enough strength?" Xietain muttered in confusion despite knowing deep in his heart that it was definitely not the reason. In fact, several seconds passed, but no matter how hard he tried the pagoda doors did not open. Even after using practically every point of his strength stat, the double door did not move from its place even a millimeter. "My God!" Xietain was dumbfounded as he stared at the door before him with his eyes wide open. His strength stat was over 900 points in total, but even then the door did not move from its place in the slightest. There wasn't even any trembling at all. "What's wrong?" Wu Yijuan asked behind the several defensive barriers that had been erected by Shangguan Bing Shui and Nangong Lingxin. The door isn't opening." Xietain didn't quite know what to say. Shangguan Bingshui and Nangong Lingxin exchanged glances as they heard what Bai Zemin said and how by prior agreement the two women deactivated their skills, causing the ice walls to melt and the magical energy barrier to fade away completely. What do you mean by the door isn't opening? Shangguan Bingshui asked after Bai Zemin came back into view. It just won't open. Bai Zemin shook his head and explained what had just happened. What? Zhongde looked at him in disbelief as he heard that the door didn't even move even after Bai Zemin used all his strength. How can that be possible? My current strength is enough to crush a 10-story building with one punch. What Zhongde meant was that if he could crush a building with a single blow, then the terrifying full strength of Bai Zemin should have ripped those doors off the walls as soon as he touched them. However, Bai Zemin simply shook his head without saying anything more. Even for him it was hard to believe, but it was the truth and had to be accepted as it was. Everyone looked at each other in dismay and not knowing what to do as they watched the leader stand in silence. Approximately 10 minutes passed, during which Shangguan Bingshui and several other people tried to open the door, using all kinds of means, but none of them succeeded. Feng Tianwu even tried to melt the door using one of her fire skills only to find that the peculiar metal did not even overheat, forgetting to melt. Huang Tian even tried to break the walls of the pagoda using brute force with the help of Zhongde, but even with the united strength of the two men the walls did not even miss some of their paint, let alone collapse. It was around that time that the worldwide phenomenon where day and night changed turns for several minutes finally came to an end. With the moon and stars once again reigning over their heads, Bai Zemin was about to order everyone to retire to continue studying the area better tomorrow morning when he noticed that Wu Yijuan and Meng Qi seemed to be chatting about something several meters apart. Curious, he walked over to them to ask what they were talking about, and as he approached he heard some weird words that he didn't understand at all. Girls, did you discover something? He asked, startling them. Wu Yijuan even jumped slightly scared as she hadn't felt him at all. Meng Qi didn't look at him and instead pointed at the lion statue in front of her. Big brother, look at this. Come closer. Bai Zemin obeyed honestly and with his hopes high he walked forward. What is this? He said in amazement. See? That light inside the mouth wasn't visible before, probably because of the sun, but when the night came back, I thought I noticed something unusual, so I came to see what it was. Meng Qi replied as she looked at the pale white light inside the lion's mouth. Had it not been for the fact that she happened to be there right at the moment when the world went dark, she definitely would not have noticed the pale light, since when night descended again all the light from the statue was absorbed, so that only by looking specifically inside the mouth very carefully could it be seen. That shape. That faint glow. Bai Zemin suddenly thought of something while looking at the white light and quickly glanced at Wu Yijuan before hurriedly ordering, Wu Yijuan, take that object out for me. Oh, okay. Wu Yijuan nodded and quickly pulled out a small pink seed from inside her leather sack. She seemed to do something with the seed as soon as a small sprout began to grow, and within seconds a sort of super thin vine formed that with Wu Yijuan's care went into the mouth of the lion statue. The cavity was so small that probably only something the size of a newborn baby's fist could fit in there, but the statue was actually tall enough that even an adult's arm could not reach the bottom where the small glowing object was located. Soon, Wu Yijuan's eyes lit up as she said in a low voice, "Success." Under the watchful eyes of Bai Zemin and Meng Qi, the pink-colored vine began to contract in such a way that a few seconds later it appeared outside the lion statue again. However, the pink vine was clinging to a small, irregularly shaped white object about the size of a marble. I knew it. Bai Zemin snapped his fingers as he took the object in his hands. Soulstone? Wu Yijuan said in amazement. What was a soulstone doing in there? Actually, it's an unclassified soulstone. Bai Zemin nodded, but he suddenly frowned and said in confusion, but who would throw a soul stone into the statue's mouth? Could it be that a human was here before? Wu Yijuan said with some hesitation, as honestly, such a theory was hard to believe. Although I doubt it, We can't deny that possibility. Xietain nodded before shaking his head and pointing out, but if it really is the case, then why in the world would a human come here to throw a soul stone into a statue? It doesn't make sense. The trio's small gathering soon caught the attention of the others who were discussing possible theories and options in order to open the pagodas. Curious, they walked toward the group of 3. Soulstone? Shangguan Bingshui said immediately upon seeing the small object in Xietan's hands. Did you find out something? She, like everyone else, thought that perhaps Xietain and the 2 girls had discovered something to do with soul stones, and that was why they had taken one out. However, when they heard from Xietain that such a soul stone was actually inside the statue, they were so shocked that they were at a loss for words to say, "This? What is this all about?" Feng Tianwu asked in astonishment. That soul stone has always been there? I don't think a person would go to the trouble of coming deep into the forests just to hide a soul stone inside a bronze statue. The words of Feng Tianwu were greeted with silence. No one said anything since, although her words implied something crazy, nobody could really argue against it, since, in their hearts, they were also thinking the same thing as her. However, wouldn't such a thing imply that in the past the earth also had evolved creatures? How else could the appearance of that little unclassified soul stone be explained otherwise? Xietain had a deep frown on his face as he tried to find a clear answer to this whole confusing situation they had inadvertently stumbled upon. Somehow, many things were heading in a way that he could not control regardless of his strength due to lack of knowledge and information. Big brother, look at this. Xietain quickly looked in the direction of the voice and saw Mengqi lying on the ground, looking directly under the bronze lion's chin. He didn't even think about it before he threw himself on the ground and looked up in the same position as his sister. Xietain murmured in a low yet clear voice in the middle of the night silence. Right on the bottom of the statue's chin, the number 1000 was written in Mandarin characters. Could it be that this thing wants 1000 unclassified soul stones? He reasoned immediately. I was thinking the same thing too. Mengqi looked at him and nodded with a serious expression on her face. I think the only way to open the pagodas is through these bronze statues, and apparently, the statues work with soul stones. She hesitated for a moment before saying what everyone was thinking in their hearts. Maybe someone left that soul stone as a clue. The real question was, who had left that soul stone there? With only one question at the base, many more were born automatically. Was it really someone from ancient times? Had the soul record visited this world before? Could the pagodas have been built to hide something? Chapter 649 Ancient Ruins, Part 2 of 2. In accordance with the theory that Xietain and Mengqi reached after seeing the word written on the underside of the bronze lion's chin, he took out 1000 unclassified soul stones from his spatial storage ring and began to throw them one by one into the statue's mouth. The soul stones were very small, even the only third-order soul stone in Xietan's possession was not even the size of a baby's fist and could barely be considered a lotus seed, so the unclassified stones that were barely the size of a small fingernail had no problem passing through the small hole in the statue's jaws. 2 or 3 minutes later, and under everyone's anxious eyes, Xietain finally finished throwing 1000 unsorted soul stones into the bronze lion statue. However, several seconds later all that greeted them was the sound of howling wind in the middle of the night. Nothing happened? Sun Ling was confused and somewhat apprehensive. The others also looked at each other in dismay, and Xietain frowned trying to understand what was wrong. However, it was at that anxious moment when a flash of light suddenly began to illuminate the area and attracted the attention of all of them. Flash. On the left side of the large stone square, part of the lines that made up what looked like a huge magic circle began to light up little by little. The pale blue light was by no means disturbing to the eye, and in the midst of the darkness, it felt extremely warm. However, as the blue light spread across the thick, small lines coming closer and closer in their direction, none of them dared to relax as they didn't know with what they would be greeted next. Get ready to fight. Baizemin ordered out of prevention as he took a step forward and subconsciously covered Meng Qi behind him. What was happening woke up some of those who were resting, and seeing that part of the stone square was beginning to light up, they also began to rush out of the tents in a hurry. Some of them even ran out bare-chested and struggled to put on their armor while holding their weapons tightly. Approximately 5 minutes later, 1/10 of the lines covering the circular stone square had lit up with that faint pale blue light. However, except for the bronze lion which also glowed slightly with the same color of light, nothing else happened. No enemies appeared. The pagoda in front on the left side of the square did not open at all. Nothing that Baizemin or the others expected happened. However, even though nothing had happened, they all knew in their hearts what was really going on. It was just that none of them really wanted to admit it. Finally, after several seconds of silence, Wu Yijuan forced a smile, and while looking at the bronze lion located on the other side of the double door, she quietly remarked, "Considering that 1/10 of the square has just been illuminated and considering that there are 5 pagodas and 10 lion statues here, I think we need to do something about all of them." Baizemin exchanged glances with Shangguan Bing Shui before smiling bitterly and saying in a low voice, "Isn't it ironic that we have to thank the weaver ants?" Upon hearing Baizemin's words, they all felt like spitting out 3 liters of blood and dying. However, in their hearts, they knew that he was right, because while it was true that their lives were in danger, as a single grab by those strong insects was all it took to be torn apart, it was thanks to the weaver ants that attacked them that the group managed to obtain large numbers of soul stones. "At least, we don't have to go back empty-handed." Nangong Lingxin shook her head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. For more, visit mtnovel.com. It really is like that. Chen, he commented as he lay on his back under the head of the bronze lion located on the right side of the pagoda. "This statue also requires 1,000 unclassified soul stones." Baizemin said nothing and simply began to take out more soul stones from his storage ring. What else could he do? There was no way he was leaving here without knowing what was hidden inside the pagodas, or what this place hid in general. He and everyone else could find answers to many questions, and that alone was definitely worth the great price they were paying. Indeed, after a few minutes, right after Baizemin threw the 1,000th soul stone inside the bronze statue, the same pale blue color started to illuminate part of the square, and in no time 2 out of 10 of the place appeared, completely illuminated by that faint pale blue light. The previously illuminated part had merged perfectly with the current one, and the small and large lines that seemed to form strange engravings made up a mysterious image similar to a puzzle that after a long time was finally being fulfilled. When the pale blue light that spread across the thickest line and one of the 10 main lines that seemed to compose the core of the giant magic circle finally reached the bronze lion statue, it began to glow slightly, and soon the light of the 2 bronze lions covered the outline of the pagoda that had been silent until now. Bang! The sound of something breaking thundered in the middle of the night, and the huge double doors that had been closed no matter what means the others used to try to open them finally detached from each other and slowly began to open backward as if someone was pulling them from the inside. Swoosh! Step back! Baizemin unhesitatingly took out the golden soul armament and turned it into a spear under everyone's astonished eyes. "What is that weapon?" Huang Tian asked in astonishment as he retreated but still stood in front of everyone and raised his giant bone shield in front of his body. It was a sword before, but it suddenly turned into a spear. Tenghua was also shocked as his pet snake hissed menacingly towards the pagoda that was opening wider and wider. "I will help you." Shangguan Bing Shui appeared beside Baizemin and said 4 simple words expressing her determination. But Baizemin did not refuse, since he did not know what might come out from inside the pagoda. If nothing evil came out, then it would be great, but it was doubtful that good luck would be with them. Flash! Flash! Suddenly, and as the doors opened wide enough for the piercing darkness of the interior to spread outward, 2 flashes of bright red light came on amidst the crackle of the increasingly open doors. Eyes? Xietain was startled before leaning forward and taking an attack stance. Of course. How could anything be so easy? Shangguan Bingshui also drew her sword and created another one with ice using her skill. She activated several skills silently and soon her weapons acquired a faint platinum-white radiance and on her leather-armored body grew another armor made of small ice fragments. Flash. 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 In just a few seconds, thousands of golden flashes glowed amidst the terrifying darkness that ruled inside the pagoda. That demonic glow scared many to the point that if it weren't for those two practically omniscient figures standing at the front, most of them might have immediately run away. Bingshui, can you feel the strength of those creatures? Xietain asked, whispering. No. Cool. Boom. The two doors finally slammed loudly against the inner walls of the pagoda after they opened completely. Suddenly, the stone plaza seemed to tremble for a moment and a loud bang similar to a large number of people, taking a step at the same time broke out in the middle of the night. Xietain suddenly caught something similar to metal shining thanks to the moon's shine and his expression abruptly changed as a thought flashed in his heart. He didn't even hesitate as he took a step forward and swung his spear in a wide diagonal arc. Swoosh! It was just at that moment when from the front a flash of bright light shot outward from the pagoda at lightning speed. Bang! The beam of blue light could not advance any further as it was obstructed precisely by the tip of the golden spear that just happened to cross its path. Xietain put a bit more strength into his arm and with a low growl waved his hand towards the sky. The beam of blue light was immediately sent flying towards the distant stars before turning into a tiny dot and disappearing without a trace. It all happened so fast that no one had had time to react to what had just happened. However, they also had no time when a second followed by a third beam of blue light shot out from inside the pagoda. Bang! 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 Xietan's body flashed and like a ghost seemed to appear in 3 different places at the same time, an effect resulting from his high agility and swift movements. 3 golden flashes flickered around each residual image and just like before the 3 beams of blue energy were deflected and sent skyward. Ice wall. Shangguan Bingshui pointed to the front with a flash of coldness shining in her eyes. The frost gathered at speeds never seen before and within milliseconds 2 thick walls of ice over 2 meters high appeared separating the pagoda and whatever was inside it from the human group. The blue energy beams, far from stopping, became more and more constant and in a matter of seconds, thousands of blue beams flashed from inside the pagoda and hit the ice walls. The sound that the impact between the blue energy beams and the ice walls was not explosive but was similar to the hissing sound of a hot object being dropped into cold water. Unclassified? Xietain said as if to make sure. Unclassified. Shangguan Bingshui nodded but reminded him, even so, those beams could end the life of an initial first-order human soul evolver if they hit the head. Great. Xietain nodded and was about to move forward to finish off the enemy when suddenly another change occurred. Several synchronized footsteps echoed in the middle of the night and with agile movements equivalent to a level 20 human soul evolver, over 3,000 strange silhouettes rushed out from inside the pagoda, circling the ice walls in seconds and appearing before the human group. Immediately a small commotion arose as one of these creatures charged forward and with a sword that looked quite exquisite attacked the first soul evolver in the front line but ended up finding itself being sent flying after being parried by Zhongda's giant mace. However, that creature soon stood up again and with unwavering resolve charged forward again. All the other creatures also began to attack and in a couple of exchanges, a level 23 human soul evolver was decapitated after being surrounded by 3 enemies. This was the first casualty Xietain experienced in this operation. What the hell are those things? In anger, Xietain was shocked to realize that they were not living beings as they did not even have a drop of blood in their bodies. He immediately used the blood he always had stored in his liquid storage pearl and created hundreds of sharp blood chains that under his control dismembered the creatures that approached his group with ease, saving the lives of all those in danger. They are mechanical golems. Lilith's voice rang in his mind. Golems? Xietain repeated in awe as he finished off the mechanical golems and looked towards the pagoda. Beyond the ice wall, noticing that the mechanical golems were still firing their weapons at the defensive wall. Shangguan Bingshui finally did not have the patience to wait and with a wave of her hand created hundreds of ice pikes. The ice pikes began to fly in a straight line, piercing through the ice wall as if it was not there and crushing the heads of whatever was inside the pagodas, as she wisely aimed at where the red eyes were. Chen He and the other soul evolvers with ranged attacks were also not far behind and started attacking and crushing the enemies beyond the ice wall. On the other hand, with the help of Xietain and the other main warriors, the human group finally overpowered the melee mechanical golems. Now that you've figured it out, there's no harm in me telling you. Lilith sighed in relief and with some delight as she tried to remain calm, she said slowly, "Little brother Xietain, I think you hit the big prize this time. You're standing right on top of what seems to be ancient ruins, and I dare say there's a lot of good stuff inside." Chapter 650, Conquering the First Silver Pagoda. The words Lilith just said confused Xietain immensely. He had many questions he wanted to ask her, but that he knew would probably not be answered in their entirety if they somehow or other involved matters against the rules. For example, Xietain knew that if the information he needed to know contained something that would prevent him from taking a certain path, then she could not tell him anything, as that would be involving herself in his immediate fate very deeply. However, even without asking questions, there was something that Xietain understood after hearing the words ancient ruins. Where there were ancient ruins, treasures were a given. Regardless of the era or age, whenever a ruin from ancient times was found, then that country and eventually the entire world was bound to benefit in some way or another. Of course, there was first the unknown path that was wrapped in a cloak of darkness and mystery to be revealed. A path which, judging by the circumstances they were currently facing, would definitely not be smooth and easy to walk. These things don't even give soul power after we kill them. Kai Jingyi bellowed angrily as she kicked a golem she had just torn apart with her dagger. Of course not, they're golems. Zhongde pointed out as he smashed another golem with his mace and turned it into a pile of useless scrap. Bah! Kai Jingyi was still dissatisfied, so her body began to blink among the melee mechanical golems, and for every second that passed at least a dozen of them were chopped into pieces, and the gleam in their eyes faded after they fell to the ground. While people like Zhongde, Kai Jingyi, Huang Tian, Teng Hua, Sun Ling, Wu Yijuan, Nangong Lingxin, Liang Jing, Xiaoya, Little Snow, Meng Qi, and others teamed up with lower-level soul evolvers to take down the mechanical golems in close combat. People like Shangguan Bingshui, Feng Tianwu, Feng Hong, Chen He, Xietain, and many more mages and archers took it upon themselves to crush the enemies attacking from inside the pagoda. Explosions sounded constantly, along with curses and screams of pain as a soul evolver was sent flying after being hit by the power of the mechanical golems, barely clinging to their lives thanks to the rank 1 armor and equipment that Xietain had provided them with. On the other hand, the sound of metal being torn and falling to the ground became clearer and clearer in the middle of the night. Iron arrows powered by mana arrows, lightning bolts, fireballs, wind blades, clouds of corrosive acid, ice pikes, ice swords, earth spears, blood spears, and all kinds of magic composed of different elements flew through the skies in the direction of the pagoda. The mechanical golems attacking from within quickly began to be destroyed, and the power of the blue light beams began to be less threatening as the number of enemies decreased. Surprisingly, even when the pagoda was hit by some misplaced magical skill, the walls held firm, and so far not even a fragment of stone belonging to the square had been destroyed. Damn it, where the hell are these creatures coming from? Chen He couldn't help but curse when after more than 30 minutes of continuous fighting the mechanical golems continued to pour out from the pagoda as if there was no end in sight. What you want to know is probably what everyone here is wondering, little he. Sun Ling said a bit grumpily. Her mood wasn't very good as her passive ability that served to affect the movements and reasoning of enemies didn't work against machine-like creatures, so her battle prowess had dropped considerably as a result. The face of Bai Zemin was uncertain as he continued to use blood manipulation to finish off the gunners in the back or to support at crucial moments anyone who was about to lose their life. He had visited this place with his family a few years ago and had even been inside all the pagodas except for the central one that was always closed to the public. However, while the inside of the pagoda was large enough to accommodate many people, the number of mechanical golems that he and his team had destroyed during this time was definitely over 50,000. So, where the hell were those golems coming from and how had they been put in there? Bai Zemin soon thought of something, and associating it with the previous words of Lilith, he understood what was going on. Underground? He muttered with narrowed eyes. More magic circles? Did you say something? Shangguan Bing Shui, who was standing to his left, asked in confusion while not stopping attacking and defending at the same time, saving the lives of not a few in the process. No, it's nothing. Bai Zemin shook his head before shouting loudly, everyone, keep going like this. The enemy seems to be running out of troops soon. Regardless of the reason why he had said that, the words from Bai Zemin were basically divine words at this point for most of the soul evolvers fighting alongside him. Therefore, upon hearing that they would soon be finishing, many could not help but roar with renewed humor and begin to attack more fiercely with the idea of speeding up the process. Indeed, Bai Zemin proved to be right when approximately 10 minutes later the melee-type mechanical golems stopped coming to attack them, so in seconds the remaining few were crushed to pieces. Very good. Holy shit, it's finally done. Some had received minor wounds during the combat, while others received wounds heavy enough to fall unconscious when their bodies relaxed after the combat ended. However, everyone was glad that the end was near. All soul evolvers of the Black Turtle Guild, stay back. Bai Zemin did not allow the melee fighters to approach in any way. The energy beams that the gunner golems fired from inside the pagoda were really powerful, to the point that just as Shangguan Bing Shui said earlier, a first-order human soul evolver of the initial stage would be killed on the spot if they were hit in a vital area. Approximately 5 minutes later, the last of the gunner golems fell to the ground when its head was hit by a fire arrow launched by Feng Hong. Immediately after that, the place fell deathly silent, and seconds later the blue light covering February 10th of the stone square changed to a green color. Do any? Feng Tianwu muttered under her breath. Her generous chest rose and fell as a result of her slightly labored breathing. She had consumed quite a bit of mana in the battle against the Weaver ants and had yet to fully recover when another battle raged, so she needed a night's rest to regain her full strength. In fact, Feng Tianwu was not the only one, as most of those present had slightly pale faces and were physically and mentally exhausted. Half of them had barely been able to sleep for 1 hour when they were awakened by the commotion, and the other half had not even been able to rest at all throughout the whole day. Bai Zemin noticed the relieved expressions on the faces of everybody when they realized that the battle was over, and he realized that they all needed a refreshing night's sleep. Sending them off to fight now was definitely not wise at all. What do we do now? Sun Ling walked up to Bai Zemin and looked at him. He noticed that her face was slightly sweaty and her breathing was also a bit labored. At the end of the day, Sun Ling was one of the few who charged to the front, and at all times she was fighting at least against 10 mechanical golems at the same time, so she was naturally somewhat exhausted after losing a lot of her stamina. Bai Zemin turned to face the giant door of the now open pagoda before closing his eyes and ordering in a soft voice, "Everyone, you've done a good job. Return to the tents and get some rest. We will continue the exploration in 6 hours." Several sighs of relief filled the surroundings as relieved smiles filled the faces of everyone present. Bai Zemin gave a few more orders and eventually, except for him, Shangguan Bing Shui, Wu Yijuan, Chen He, and Zhong De, everyone went to sleep to replenish their energy. While Xiaya was probably still well, her assigned task was to protect Sun Ling and in urgent moments support Wu Yijuan if her life was ever in danger, and Bai Zemin or Shangguan Bing Shui could not help her. Although Mengqi also wanted to stay awake, Bai Zemin reprimanded her and ordered her in a firm voice to go to sleep, for which she reluctantly retreated to the central tent and soon fell asleep next to Little Snow. While Mengqi wanted to be more useful and help her brother the most, her stamina was not particularly high, and this was basically her first large-scale exploration and assault as a soul evolver. The number of things she had experienced in just a day was too many, so a night's rest was probably something she needed both physically and mentally. With each of them scattered in different areas and covering the camp area to prevent any mutant creature or enemy of any kind from sneaking in and wreaking havoc on the sleeping troops, the night's time began to run slowly. Meanwhile, Bai Zemin sat cross-legged on the ground staring at the open door of the pagoda they had just conquered. The night still had several hours to go, so he would surely be bored doing nothing during all that time. Suddenly, a breeze of otherworldly air containing the scent of fresh roses surrounded him, and not even a second later he heard the lovely voice of the one who had become the most important woman in his life. "Aren't you going in now?" For more, visit mtnovel.com. It's hard to say if there isn't a more powerful enemy in there. Even though all the golems had a power level equivalent to an unclassified soul evolver, the swords carried by the melee types were all rank 1 swords with over 300 points of physical attack power, Bai Zemin pointed out in a whispering voice. On the other hand, the power of those energy beams was truly terrifying. Even First Order level 30 mutant beasts would be suppressed if a team of 50 normal men surrounded it with that kind of weapon. I see. That means you'll wait until tomorrow? Yeah. Besides, I still need to think of a countermeasure. Countermeasure? If worst comes to worst, I'll probably have to use Crimson Blood Judgment. And if things get really bad, I might even have to use the power of gravity manipulation or the endless blue lotus flame. I need to think up something to not affect the surroundings in a big way. I understand. I guess you'll use the night to think about it? Yup. Bai Zemin nodded his head and suddenly felt a light weight resting on his back. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was, and judging by the sensation, it seemed to be Lilith resting her back on his, as Bai Zemin could feel the caresses of her hair on his neck. "I'll be your company then," Lilith whispered, her voice so soft that the wind soon swept it away and carried it far into the sky along with several dried tree leaves. "Okay." Bai Zemin closed his eyes and smiled with relief and happiness. Relief because he finally didn't feel lonely anymore. Even in the middle of the night, regardless of whether he had to stand guard or if he couldn't sleep, he would now have someone to accompany him for the rest of his life. As for the reason why he was happy, Bai Zemin believed that any sentient living being in the universe would be happy to be reciprocated and accompanied by the one they loved, even in the middle of a cold night like this one. The night passed without any incident worth mentioning. There were no enemies attacking from the air, from the forests, or even coming out of the now open pagoda. Bai Zemin and Lilith rested against each other as they chatted about things that had no real purpose, mostly with Bai Zemin sharing some of his life's experiences and Lilith giggling under her breath or making funny remarks about it. When the tactical compass clock struck 8 a.m. and after everyone had eaten breakfast, Bai Zemin finally stood up after staying in lotus position all night and turned around. There, hundreds of faces charged with energy and vigor looked at him with firm, resolute expressions, brimming with faith and overflowing with confidence. A night's sleep really could do wonders. "Move." Bai Zemin waved his hand and turned on the spot. His eyes flashed with anticipation as he took the first step forward toward what could be one of the greatest changes for mankind.